The Ryan Ries Show from Southern California. This is The Ryan Ries Show. Post your questions using @Ryan Ries on his Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook. Are you ready?
All right, it is going down. This show, I'm excited. I got contacted by one of my good friends, Angie Colossen out in Nashville, and she's actually contacted me several times when she has really amazing people I need to get in the studio. She contacted me. She says, you need to get this guy in. He's coming to California. He has a radical story. It would be perfect for your guys' show. So here we are after several text messages and a couple months. Actually, you know what? You actually showing up, it was a lot quicker than most guests. Normally it could take a year or whatever. So this happened pretty quickly. It's Bryan Rucker. He's the director of Celebrate Recovery at the WFR Church in West Monroe, Louisiana. And you're also the former member, you were part of the Duck Dynasty, right? Former cast on some of the shows?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that was, that was just really cool to be a part of that, being somebody from where I'm from. Because I didn't grow up in West Monroe, Louisiana. I grew up in Houston, Texas.
Right. So I want to actually, that's interesting because I was listening to some of your story and I did hear that you were actually down there in Houston, which we have a lot of friends down there. We've done a lot of work. But now you're out there with these guys in Louisiana. Yeah. And it's probably night and day difference, right, between the two kind of lifestyles?
Oh, 100%. I mean, you got Houston, Texas, which is fast-paced. And right. Especially where I'm from, I grew up in, like, low-income neighborhood, basically the projects. Mm-hmm. And so it's chaos everywhere, almost like you develop this survival mentality just staying there. And then I get to West Monroe, Louisiana, where everybody's kind, everybody's friendly. It's a lot slower.
Did that freak you out or what?
No, for sure. For sure.
What do they want from me?
Well, yeah, it was like, what do you want from me? But then also, I remember calling people back home and being like, man, this place is like a fairy tale. And people that know West Monroe, Louisiana, they're like, no, it stinks. There's a paper mill there. They're like, there's no fairy tale. But to me, I was like, man, people out here are nice. They're kind. These people are waiting to get married before they have sex. I'm like, man, I didn't know this place existed.
It's a place with like morals. It's like that how America was actually created with morals and everything. And it's funny because I'm from LA and I moved up to Boise recently. And people were like, wait for you to like make a right turn or, people are like nice. Right. Versus here, you're fighting to get in the lane and you're here and people are in a rush and people are pissed off and the whole thing. So I know it's amazing. We're like, what is going on here? People are so stinking nice. Yeah. But before we even get to that, let's start how you even grew up. I mean, did you grow up, when you were growing up, what were you into? Because I know these guys are, shooting guns, catching fish, and all that stuff. Yeah. How'd you grow up? Did you grow up with a father and a mother? How'd your life start?
No, so basically, I've been on my own since I was 13 years old. I grew up, like I said, in Houston, Texas. In the projects, literally in a 2-bedroom apartment all the way in the back. The neighborhood I grew up in, we called it the Hole because it was one way in, one way out. And, growing up there, it was, I came to the realization at 9 years old that, like, you can die. And that was whenever I seen a guy get gunned down in this field right next to the apartments where we used to play games at. Games like Run Through the Middle, Tag. Like, I watched a dude get gunned down as I'm sitting on my porch, and I'm thinking to myself, like, oh, like, you can die out here. Right. And, for a 9-year-old kid, that's a really strange realization to come to. It kind of throws everything about your development out of whack.
Right.
And so
I have a question for you though about these gangs. So what kind of gangs are down there in Houston? Is it?
It's a lot like the gangs here, only a lot less organized. Okay. You would think that like you hear gang, it's got to be organized and everything else. Yeah. Well, not so much. Right. From my understanding, at least what I was taught growing up, as gangs migrated out of LA, they would go to Arizona, and then Houston was one of those next big hubs where they started planting gangs. Right. And so you have Bloods, you have Crips, you have different sections.
So it's all those gangs.
Yeah. A lot of Hispanic gangs also, that stem from the prison system. Right. And everything a little bit different, but pretty much the same thing. Different names in some degrees, but I mean, a lot of it is very similar.
Got it. So white gangs too?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, absolutely. Aryan Brotherhood, they actually in prison, you have the ABT, which is the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas. Okay. Direct break off from the Aryan Brotherhood that was started here. You have Woodpile, which is, Pecker Woods, stuff like that.
Crazy.
Yeah.
So here you are, you're growing up in this area, in the neighborhood, and you see this guy get taken out. How'd that affect you growing up? And what was that? Because obviously, there's all these things that happen to you when you look back at your life. There's these places that mark these times in your life that it changes like your mentality, it changes your heart. It just does something to you. It has an impact on your life.
Yeah. Well, what we know now is those are trauma points, right? But you growing up in that, you don't realize what trauma is or anything else. You tell yourself, and the only thing that you know is that this is how life is. Right. So I grew up in an all black neighborhood.
Okay.
So the street gang that I was part of was just predominantly a black street gang.
Got it.
And so being the only person my color there, like I used to have to fight every day as a real young kid. I used to have to fight before I got on the bus, when I was on the bus, and then when I got off the bus. Dang. Until eventually, I just kind of earned my stripes and I was just another kid in the neighborhood.
Right.
So seeing all this stuff, it wasn't just watching the murder happen, but it was, just walking to the corner store to get a Snickers bar. You see prostitutes, you see people selling crack and everything else. And one of the people that I was closest to in my neighborhood, another kid, his dad was like one of the biggest narcotics distributors there. And so he kind of took me under his wing. I remember being a little kid learning how to roll blunts and putting them in a pencil bag and taking them to school, selling blunts like 3 for $5, stuff like that. Yeah. It was just how I grew up.
Yep.
And I really didn't know that there was any other way. I remember watching shows like Family Matters and Full House, growing up.
Right.
And I would see how they operated and the stuff that happened, and I was just like, man, that's not real. Like that stuff
totally
doesn't exist.
Fantasy.
It just doesn't exist.
Yep.
It's made for TV. And so man, like just my perspective of everything was so skewed because of the stuff that I witnessed on a day-to-day.
So how was it growing up with your mom and your dad? How'd they affect your life, or what influence did they have as you were growing up around this whole?
Yeah, so never knew my dad ever. Never knew him or anything like that. I grew up in the home with my mom and my grandmother. And my mom, she got sick when I was around 12 years old. She had actually gotten sick way before that, but she bounced back. She started having tumors. And I remember, being a kid, she went into the hospital for tumors. They would go in, remove a tumor, and then another one would develop. They would go in, remove that tumor, another one would develop. She ended up spending almost an entire year in the hospital, and my life consisted of like getting up, go to school, get out of school, go to the hospital, visit my mom, and then come back home. And at that point, I started selling weed at 11, started selling crack at 12. So at that point, like I'm just on the block with my friends.
Right, yeah. I know that age. That's that age when you could be out in the streets.
Yeah. I'm selling dime bags and nickel rocks,
Crazy.
And so...
you used to carry back then?
Pistols? Yeah. No, I didn't buy my first gun until after my mom died. And so, I go and visit her, come home, everything. Well, on one of the last surgeries that they did to remove a tumor, they ended up sewing her back up with one of the towels that you wipe up blood with in the operating room inside of her. And it caused a foreign body infection. I remember the doctor coming in saying, hey, we made a mistake. And then they go in, remove the towel, say they get rid of all the infection. I would go up to the hospital and I'd see my mom laying in this bed with these tubes hooked up to her, and it was just pumping this green fluid out of her into this clear tub at the end of the bed. And they say they get rid of all the infection. They send her home. And like I said, we stayed in a 2-bedroom apartment at that time. And so my grandma had a room, I had a room, and then my mom, before she went into the hospital, would just kind of stay in the living room. And whenever they sent her home, she still had IVs in her and stuff like that. And so we had to move everything out of my room and move in like a hospital bed and everything. We were dirt poor, didn't have nothing. So a friend of the family would come and tend to her IVs because we couldn't afford nobody to do that.
Yeah, dang.
Well, on December 18th, it was about a week later, I'm home from school for break, and she kept wanting me to watch this movie with her. I would walk into my room and she would be in there. The movie was Chicken Run. It was this like claymation movie.
I know that movie, yeah.
Yeah, and she kept wanting me to watch it with her. It was coming on TV. And I was like, yeah, I'll watch the movie with you. And then I'd go outside, come back in, and she'd say, hey, are you going to watch this movie with me? I'm like, yeah, I'm going to watch the movie with you. I'd go back outside, come back in. And then one of the last times I talked to her, she said, hey, the movie's coming on. Will you please watch this movie with me? And I was like, yeah, I'll be right back. And I was just going outside, hang out with my friends, sell dime bags.
Right.
And then I come back in that last time, and I remember walking by the bed that was in my room and I remember hearing her snoring, and I thought to myself, okay, good, I ain't got to watch that stupid movie. I go back out into the living room for the night, and I just sleep in the living room. The next morning, I wake up, and my grandma's like, hey, can you go get your mom up? Miss Diane's about to come change her IVs. And I walk up, I get to the doorway of the bedroom, and it just felt weird. You know, it was like this stillness. I start walking up to the bed, and I remember having the thought of like, man, she looks like she's dead. But still, I walk up to her and I start nudging her on her shoulder, and I'm like, hey, Mom, wake up. And she passed away that night. So at 13 years old, I found my mom dead.
Another trauma
point, right?
Dang. So now, okay, so you don't have your father around, never met him, you lost your mom, you're selling drugs, how old again, 13?
13.
You're 13 years old, you're with your grandma.
Yeah.
So what was the next thing that happens?
So like literally the next thing that happens is like I'm hit with another reality. Like, so since I'm a counselor now, I see all these trauma things that happen.
Yeah.
And you don't realize what they are at the time. But like I literally walk into the living room and I tell my grandma, hey, my mom's dead. And she's like, what? You know, this and that.
Freaking out, yeah.
Like, I literally have to pick up the phone, call 911 and say, hey, my mom died. And then I just set the phone down and I leave. Well, not long after, you know, just kind of fast forward a little bit, less than 6 months later, I get incarcerated for the first time.
Okay, well, this is my question. When that happened, what happened inside of your heart? Because like I had a pretty gnarly trauma with some stuff when I was young, and it led me to like hate God and not trust women, and like there's all this crazy stuff with like death that happened to me.
Yeah.
And I just got I was just pissed off, hated people, and just angry at God, wanted nothing to do with him.
Yeah.
Losing your mom. If you're a Christian, not a Christian, or whatever it is, these are some feelings that could definitely happen where you just get angry at the God, even if you believe in a God.
Yeah, so I'll put it like this, man. Like, so I grew up totally atheist, never believed in God or anything else.
Okay.
So it wasn't really a thought towards God ever. But I remember that whenever I made it back to the apartment that day, the paramedics were there. I walk in, and the paramedics set me down on the couch, and he tells me, hey, we're sorry to tell you, but your mom died, right? And I remember I cried for about half a second, and then I just was angry. I had people showing up, people calling. I remember I had to pick up the phone and call everybody we knew. Myself, hey, I was just calling to let you know my mom died. Hang up the phone, call the next person.
Right.
Hey, I'm just calling to let you know my mom died. Hang up the phone, call the next person. Right. And so it was like every single phone call I made and every single time somebody showed up and tried to talk to me, it just made me more and more angry. So like I said, we're in the projects. So they had this police liaison officer show up because it's December 19th. It's right before Christmas. And she shows up with this box, and it's got like a pair of shoes in there, basketball, football. Like, hey, we're sorry, your mom passed away right before Christmas. Here's this giant box of gifts. And I was just like, man, I don't give a crap about none of that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly.
And so everything just made me more and more angry. And it wasn't necessarily I'm angry at God. You know,
you're just angry at.
Truth be told, I don't even know what I was angry at.
Yeah.
I just knew I was angry. And, you know, I was selling a little bit of drugs here and there, just kind of hanging out with friends, just really just trying to be a part of the neighborhood. But that's where it shifted. That's where it was like, I don't care about nothing.
Another question. Are you using drugs as well, or are you just slanging it?
I was smoking a little bit of weed.
So you weren't getting on the hard stuff. It was just more weed and moving the units.
Yeah, because I was I was brought up by these gang members and drug dealers who it's like, hey, you don't do any of this stuff. Like we sell this stuff, but we don't do it.
Right.
Now you get older, you realize, oh, y'all are doing coke and stuff too. But at least that's how it was portrayed to us. Like if you use it, you're a dope fiend. Like you can't do that.
Right.
We're making money off of it.
Gotcha. Okay. So now here you are. So what are the next moves that you make in your life from this point on?
So I go and I buy my first gun. Less than 6 months later, I'm still 13. I go get my first gun, and it was a little 25 Beretta. It was one of those ones that had the flip up barrel. I didn't even have a clip for it. I just had the gun and one bullet in the barrel. And I remember getting the gun, and I'm thinking to myself, like, man, I could be a millionaire with this thing, right? Like literally, that was the thought. I was like, okay, this gun, like I can take something that somebody else has and allow me to have something, And so
get that power.
Yeah, the power of it, And so I came up with this idea that I was gonna rob a Schwann's truck. I don't know if you're familiar.
No,
it's a food truck.
Okay.
And they would come through the neighborhood and they would deliver food to like older people. And, it's actually kind of funny because, in my 13-year-old mind, I'm like, oh man, this truck comes into the neighborhood. Like they're dropping off food. They just got to have a stack of cash on them, And so I'm like, all right, I'm going to rob that truck. And literally I ran up on the truck and I pull out the gun and I robbed the guy. And he was about to deliver 2 boxes of ice cream sandwiches to somebody. So he literally throws the ice cream sandwiches at me as this short, chunky, Hispanic-looking kid runs up to him with a gun. And he throws the boxes of ice cream sandwiches at me.
At you?
Yeah. So then I'm like, now my adrenaline's pumping. I ain't never did this before. You know what I'm saying? So I pick up the ice cream sandwiches and I take off running to my apartment, right? And so I committed my first robbery at 13 years old, and all I got was 2 boxes of ice cream sandwiches. Less than 30 minutes later, the cops come and arrest me.
Oh, my gosh.
And I go to jail for the first time at 13 for aggravated robbery with a deadly weapon.
Wow. So how much time did you do for that?
2.5 years.
Really?
Yeah. So I was actually only supposed to do 9 months. So they kind of showed me a little bit of grace, was like, hey, his mom died, all these circumstances. So I go to juvie at 13, start going to court and everything, and they sentenced me to 9 months TYC, which is Texas Youth Commission, basically penitentiary for
the youth,
for the youth, right? Well, of course, I've always been a good talker. I had leadership skills. I've never been the toughest guy or anything else, but I could talk some people into stuff. So I go there with the 9-month sentence, and I tell myself, okay, well, I'm in jail. I need to start a gang. And so I started this little clique of people, and next thing you know, I got hit with an organized crime charge inside a juvenile facility, and I turned my 9 months into 2.5 years. So I'm locked up from 13 to 16 years old.
Unbelievable. So then from that point, after you got hit with that, did you decide just to do your time and just to get out?
Well, no. So they actually, they shipped me to this place called Gulf Coast. It's in Huntsville, Texas, actually New Waverly. But so basically what they said is like, if we don't make you do anything, like this is going to be the rest of your life. It's crazy how, looking back, how much God was still seeking after me, like how much God was putting stuff in place for my future, and I didn't even realize it. So they sent me to Gulf Coast, and basically the only way to be eligible for release is you have to get a GED, pass your learner's permit test, and get a builder's trade. And if you do that, then you're eligible for release.
Perfect.
So I'm like, okay, you gave me some goals. You tell me I could get out of here. 6 months later, I got my GED, passed my learner's permit test, and I had a builder's trade in painting and remodeling.
Perfect.
And so I get released.
That's amazing. So now this is the question. When you get out, do you go back to gangbanging, or do you actually put these trades into place?
No, 100%, right? Like, so
easy money, right?
Well, not even that, right? Like, it's almost like a discouragement because you get out with all these aspirations of like, man, I'm gonna go get a real diploma. I'm gonna go get a job and all this other stuff. Well, then you get out and it's like I walk to the high school and they're like, hey man, you can't go to school here.
Oh, they won't let you in.
No,
right,
yeah, like you got your GED, just be good with that. You
right,
know?
right.
I try to get a job, and it's like I'm this 16-year-old kid, and
with
it's
a crime. They're like, nope.
Yeah, they're like, no, you know, and then you're surrounded
That's so true.
by.
That's so true. They get you out.
Yeah.
And then when you face the real music, it's like everyone's like, no, I'm not touching you.
Yeah. Well, and then I'm surrounded by everything in my neighborhood.
Right. So you're back in the neighborhood.
So I'm back in the neighborhood. So it's like, okay, well, this is available, and so you just go right back to it.
Okay, so you're 16 at this point.
Yeah.
When you're out, so you're going back. You're slanging stuff. What was the next pivotal moment? Do you feel like where God was kind of interceding or changing directions?
You know, I can't think of a moment during that time period that I can recall that I felt like, man, God was really with me. I felt like I was completely living for the world and just totally. And now, mind you, I didn't believe in God, so I didn't view anything through that lens. So I was just kind of in it. I made some connections while I was incarcerated in juvenile.
Did Jesus ever? Okay, go ahead. Tell me about that. And then I want to ask you: did anyone ever even cross your path with any message from Jesus or Bible when you were in jail?
Yeah.
Okay.
100%. But so I made some connections with this dude from San Antonio, and I remember the whole time we were locked up. He was part of my little clique that I started in there. He would tell me, hey, if you ever want to make some real money, like my brother has got it. Like you could call him, get the best prices, weed, coke, yada, yada, yada. And I would just kind of be like, all right, yeah, whatever. Well, whenever I'm getting released, he gives me his number, sends me a kite and gives me his brother's number. And so I go back to just doing stuff in the neighborhood. And one day I'm like, man, I'm going to just call this dude, see what's up. And it turns out he wasn't joking. He was, one of the cartel's people. And next thing you know, I start picking up several pounds of weed and coke and start selling it. And so throughout my life, I've always had this, like, there's this small little idea and then it turns into this huge thing. Like, it's just how it's always been. It starts off as this small, hey, man, I'm going to just do this, see what happens. And then next thing you know, I'm sitting in jail for 2.5 years, or I'm making upwards of $60,000 a month selling dope. Had a pipeline from Houston to Columbia, South Carolina. And it's like, man, if we had the time, I could break down how all that happened. But, man, that's one thing I love about this is, like, it's about Christ. Bringing God glory,
But it's good, though, to talk about how serious your life was and the options and the stuff that you had available to you to when God intercedes.
Oh yeah.
I mean, think about how much money that is. I mean, that's a lot of dough to be making to just.
Yeah. Well, we had a little network, man, just to, they're like, oh, Columbia, South Carolina, like that sounds really random. Well, it's crazy because one of the dudes I was locked up with, we became friends. He went on a furlough while we were incarcerated together as juveniles. On his furlough, he gets locked up, while he's on his furlough. And so the judge is like, hey, Army or prison, that's your options. So he goes and enlists in the Army and literally rode with his mom and a few of his family members to Columbia, South Carolina, where he was graduating from boot camp, basic training. And on that trip, I made connections in Atlanta, Pensacola, Florida, and Columbia, South Carolina to distribute drugs to.
Isn't that crazy?
Like, it's just, again, it's like, how does this happen? I was just like, oh, well, yeah, we're going to Columbia, South. Let's stop in Atlanta and see if anybody wants to buy a pound. And like, now, and then I made a connection there. It's just wild.
So we're coming to the half of the show. Now, what was it that led you to the moment where you found God, basically?
Okay, so.
Oh, but I do want to have you answer that question though about in when you were locked up, because a lot of people find jail or find God in jail.
Right.
Was there a Gideon Bible given to you? Was there a counselor? Was there a Christian that kind of hit you up?
Yeah, man, they had all kinds of stuff. I remember there was this guy that would show up and it was just like, hey, man, I want to tell you about Jesus. He would hang out with some of us and everything. They actually, while I was at Gulf Coast, they allowed him to take us to Taco Bell to get some food.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, like because you work your way up there at Gulf Coast. And so people definitely told me about Christ.
How did the gospel affect you when it hit you? when this guy's talking to you in jail, you just over your head, you just weren't about it, or were you actually listening to any of it?
No. Yeah. It was all fake to me.
Yeah,
right. This is all just a man-made thing.
Yeah.
That like I don't care about who he is or anything else. Yeah. I know that like if I come in here, I sit down and I talk to you. A, I get out of the dorm. Yeah. B, I get a Snickers bar, and heck, I even got a trip to Taco Bell behind it. You know what I'm saying? Gotcha. Yeah, because it's like it's all about that timing, right? With the gospel. Because I grew up, like I walked away from God for I think like 25 years of my life. Didn't want nothing to do with God, and my dad and different people would say stuff to me and he would just bounce off me because I wasn't about it. I didn't care. Yeah. But then there's that moment that it all clicks, and that's the moment that I want to get into you now. Yeah. The word says at just the right time, right? Mm-hmm. You know, and so it's like, man, and for me, that was several years later. So just to kind of fill it in. So I start making all this money. Next thing you know, I get involved with a gang-related shooting in my front yard. Person ends up dying, and then I get incarcerated for originally my charge was aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Then the victim died a month later due to complications of the gun wound, and they upped me to murder too. And so now, how old are you at this point? 17. 17 years old. Yeah, so I was only selling narcotics on that level for less than a year. Right. You know what I'm saying? But a lot can happen when you're in that world. Right. So there's a lot that I've seen, a lot of stuff that occurred, you know, just more trauma, just making me more and more of a crazy person. Yeah. And, but so yeah, at 17, I get incarcerated on a murder charge. Fight the case until I'm about 18, and then I eventually catch chain on a life without sentence on the murder charge. Life without sentence. Yeah, so basically they convicted me, and they sentenced me to life without the possibility of parole. That's insane. And all this is happening when you're 18 now. Yeah. I mean, so now you're going to the. I'm literally in court, and they, you know, I've been talking to my lawyer through this glass and these holding cells and stuff, and there was this older guy in there, and I remember I had two co-defendants on the case, one of which had kind of made a deal and said, look, you give me 35 years, I'll sign the paper, you know, and the other co-defendant was one of my closest friends. He was my best friend, and he was still on the run at the time, and so basically there's so much stuff up in the air that it was almost like, look, we're going to try to fight this thing on appeals. And so I remember I'm sitting in the holding tank. My lawyer comes to me. He says, hey, they're going to give you life, but there's hope. And I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, what, you know what I mean? I'm just like, you know, I'm trying to wrap my mind around all this stuff. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, I don't, you know, I had never been in love. I ain't never worked a job or anything else. And you're telling me that I'm going to spend the rest of my life in prison. Yeah. And so he tells me that. I go back and I sit down on the bench in there. There's this older guy in there, and he looks at me and he says, youngster, your life is over. And I remember like that's one of those moments that I just like, I remember, and I'm like, man, you're right. My life is over. And man, that's a tough pill to swallow. Yeah, that's a huge pill to swallow. You know? So, and who's this older guy? Where did he come from? He's just some random dude that was waiting court too that day. Oh, really? Yeah. Like I don't know him, don't know his name, didn't know anything about him. He was literally in the same holding cell as me in the same courtroom, waiting to hear from his lawyer. And when you hear something like this, you're still like not even considering there's a God, because like it seems like when people are at their lowest point, even if they don't believe, they're like, God, if you're real and you exist, or so at that point, it was a rebellion. Like it was like, I'm not gonna pray to this thing, right? You know, because I don't believe in it, and I've never seen it work for nobody. Right. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, no, totally. No, that's a hardcore atheist for sure. Yeah. So I'm like, I'm not even gonna pray in this moment. That's one of those, man, I'm still trying to figure out how I'm going to wrap my mind around this situation. Yeah. Okay, hey, we're going to be going to the break in a minute. This story is, I can't wait to hear how this whole thing, how you encounter God, because this is like super gnarly, the stuff that you've been through, and now here you are, you're getting a life sentence. Yeah. And there's an old guy that says that you're done, your life is over. And I'm sure that sunk in
Real nice. We have Bryan Rucker. He's the director of Celebrate Recovery at WFR Church in West Monroe, Louisiana, and he's also a former cast of the member. You're a member of the Duck Dynasty crew. So awesome privilege to have you in here, and we'll be back in 2 minutes right after the break.
Cool, man.
More of The Ryan Ries Show coming up. Post your questions at Ryan Ries on his Instagram, Twitter, and or Facebook. Now, back to The Ryan Ries Show.
All right, if you guys been tuning in on this last half, this show has been intense. Talking about someone's life, Bryan Rucker, just everything that you have been through, atheists, selling from a young age, growing up in a fatherless home, losing your mother at 13 years old, and then going to prison, getting out, and then going back to the life. You know, you had an option to change your life, but then again, it's like when you come out of prison, it's like no one wants to take a chance on you. It's unfortunate, but here you are now facing a life sentence. And if you guys don't know Bryan Rucker, he's the director of the Celebrate Recovery, which, by the way, is an amazing program. I've spoke at tons of them, like in different states. A really awesome recovery program. He's with the WR Church in West Monroe, Louisiana. He's the former cast member of the Duck Dynasty. That's how I got connected with you, through Angie Clausen and that whole group. So just an awesome time to have you here.
Yeah, man.
But here we are at this moment. I mean, I'm pumped to hear what's going to happen here, because I couldn't even imagine being in your shoes at 18 years old. Right? Doing life. And you're in court and some random old dude looks over and goes, "Youngster, your life is ruined." Now, was he there was he in the process of going to jail as well? Or
he was like, well, so we were already in jail and he's sitting there awaiting to hear from his lawyer.
So he's sitting there with you, but he's older.
Yeah. And he's like, and he just looks over and he's like, "Youngster, your life is over." You know?
Dang.
And I'm like, yeah, it is. So, you know, man, from that process, it was, man, I was so torn on so many different levels, because I catch chain, I go to prison, and, you know, I got lawyers, and my grandmother at the time telling me, like, hey, there's hope. Like, they filed for a speedy appeal. So I started going back to court quickly. And so I went on what they call in the Texas prison system a Texas tour. And so basically I hit 9 different units in less than 4 years. And that was because I was on appeal. So I never could get comfortable anywhere. I would get somewhere, get comfortable, have to fade the wall with some dudes. And then like they would ship me back to county. I would go through my court dates and everything. Then they would ship me back. It was this back and forth all the time. Crazy. And, you know, it was, you know, prison for me was really tough because just like prison here in California, it's all racially motivated.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So I'm part of and have tattoos of a black street gang because I grew up in a black neighborhood.
Right.
Yeah. And then I look like I'm Hispanic and I'm a white dude. You know what I mean?
Dang, you got it all.
So it was like, you know, which helped me a lot whenever I was selling drugs. But when you go to prison, all of a sudden there's these questions that you don't even really know. Like, I don't know what, you know what I'm saying? Just who do I need to fight? And like, let's get it over with, you know?
Right.
And so yeah, man, you know, it was a rough process, just under 4 years fighting them on appeals, and I end up beating the charges and getting released. How I beat the charges is, you know, man, it's an act of God in working through people that are not Christians. Like, man, you know, I think a lot of times we think that, you know, in order for God to show up, you have to be living in that space. But, you know, there's that song, there's no mountain he won't tear down or wall he won't break down coming after you. And so ultimately, just the short version of how I beat the charge is one of my closest friends was also my co-defendant. He got into a shootout with the police as he was getting apprehended on the original murder charge, killed a police officer. He got sentenced to death, was given the death penalty, and from death row wrote an affidavit to the DA taking credit for the original murder. And ultimately, after it was submitted into evidence...
No way.
Yeah.
No way.
After it was submitted into evidence, it basically gave me my next it gave me a chance to live.
Wow.
And so then, a few months later, I get released. And so, yeah, and that's, man, that's usually, that's the hardest part of this story to tell, because I don't know why, other than the Holy Spirit was in the midst of doing something, because he had plans for my life.
Absolutely.
And I'll kind of get into that here in a little bit on like how that led to my conversion.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But at the time, it's just like, okay, I'm out. So right around the time I'm 22 years old, I just wrapped my mind around the fact, because I'm still like not able to wrap my mind around the fact that this is my life. I'm getting pulled in several directions. So at 22 years old, I finally am like coming to terms, okay, this is going to be the rest of my life. I need to try to get to like the bird unit, just like get into some classes, like, and then I get released and I'm right back in the same neighborhood that I was at.
So
and
what is going on in your mind now? Because I mean, dude, you've been through hell and back, facing life, and now you're back in the neighborhood. What in the heck are you thinking?
I wish I could say that there was a whole lot of conscious thought during it all, but man, you're kind of just like, I don't want to say you're going with the flow, because you're slipping further and further into madness as all these changes and shifts are happening.
Right.
You're on this mental roller coaster.
Right.
So I wish I could say that I was consciously thinking, because you don't do that when you're in it. When you look back, you're like, man, I was so thrown off in the head, but like at the time, you're just in the here and now. You're in the here and now. This is what's happening. Like, okay, I'm getting released. I'm right back in the same neighborhood. And so, yeah, man, like I was just finding myself further and further, not knowing, further and further away from who God designed me to be.
Absolutely.
Like I was turning into this other thing.
Right.
I didn't even feel like a human sometimes.
Yeah,
like
totally.
There was times where I thought that, like, man, this is it's funny. People nowadays are the Matrix thing. Like, this is all a simulation. Yeah. Like, dude, I felt like that back then.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, man, none of this is real. Like, what is, I didn't know what to believe. I didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
And so, like, I end up right back where I started. And as soon as I get to the neighborhood, the cops show up and they hem me up and they said, hey, no matter what we got to do, we're going to get you off the streets. You was never supposed to get out.
Oh, my goodness.
And so I literally was like, I thought that they were either going to set me up or they were going to kill me.
Yeah.
And so my next thought was like, man, I got to get out of Houston. Like, I just got to get away from here.
Yes. Totally.
And this girl I used to mess with just on and on, off and on throughout childhood, shows up and she's got this little girl, this little baby girl, and she's like, hey, this could be your daughter, but I don't know if it is. And I'm just like,
oh my God.
I knew it wasn't my daughter.
Yeah, but still.
But it's like, hey, we're moving. Like, where are you going? Oh, I'm moving to Splendora, away from Houston. And I'm like, cool, let's ride with that.
Let's go.
And so that's where the next year, a year and a half, 2 years was me moving further and further away from Houston, thinking that was the answer. I'd move somewhere, work a job, get laid off. Move somewhere else, work a job, get laid off. We end up having my son. And then me and her split up, and long story short, I end up in East Texas over by Longview, and I'm working at this Chicken Express, and I'm like, just trying to make it, just trying to be a dad, do something different. You know, I was still getting high and still drinking and stuff, but I wasn't selling no drugs and I wasn't participating in any gang activities. Yeah. So like, hey, I'm good. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
And so, and then I get laid off from the job at Chicken Express. And it was like, I remember thinking like, man, I'm just made to sell drugs. Like, this is just what I got to do.
Yep.
And so I make a phone call, get a couple of bricks brought up to Longview. And I'm like, man, I'm about to just flood this place. Like, about to take Longview over. Houston's here type deal.
Exactly.
And around that same time period, I found out about my grandmother's health. So after I get convicted of the murder and everything, my grandmother moves to West Monroe, Louisiana, which is where her and my mom are originally from. So,
got it.
So my mom and my grandmother are originally from Monroe, West Monroe, Louisiana. And in the early 80s, they moved to Houston because they were being investigated for like counterfeiting money and some other, like they're just, you know.
Yeah.
Well, after I get convicted, my grandmother moves back to Monroe to be around family. You know, she's got other kids that live there and everything like that. And so I'd got a phone call from her, and it was like, you know, her health wasn't good. She had just got out the hospital. It was around Christmas time.
Oh, no.
So I end up going to Monroe to visit her. And I'm there, and I'm standing outside. I'm talking to this lady that's my aunt that I don't know really well or anything. And they're telling me how they're going to put her in a nursing home because insurance wouldn't pay for someone to be with her at night. And for whatever reason, I just said, well, I'll move out here.
So now you're talking about, okay, got it.
Like, I'll move out here and take care of my grandma. Right. And, you know, I didn't really think about it or anything, but, you know, I hadn't really truly been too scared of too much in my life. Right. It's almost been like my downfall. You know, it's not that I wasn't scared, it's just that I respond to fear in a different way than most people. Right. Most people get afraid, and then there's this flight. For me, it's all fight. Right? Like, I get scared, I do really outlandish and crazy stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't stop. And so after having my son, I became extremely fearful of like him having the life that I did. Right. And so I knew I didn't want to sell drugs, but I knew I was going back to it. So the reasoning in my mind is I'm literally driving back to East Texas is like, look, I'll move to Louisiana, get a fresh start. Nobody knows me. It could be like,
makes sense.
You know, and so I go back to East Texas, give the drugs to my roommate, give him the keys to the apartment, load up, and I move to Monroe, Louisiana, start taking care of my grandma. I get there for a while, and, you know, I'm there for about a month, get her back on her feet and everything, and I start going everywhere looking for a job. McDonald's and Taco Bell wouldn't even hire me.
No.
I couldn't get a break nowhere.
Unbelievable.
And, you know, and what we'll find out is God had a plan. Right. So whenever you hit a roadblock in one area, sometimes we think that that roadblock is just meant to be adversity. Sometimes it's meant to propel you to your purpose.
Yep. Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
And so I'm driving down Thomas Road in West Monroe, Louisiana. I look over to the right, see this big brown building, and it's Duck Commander. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to go in there and ask them for a job. And so I go in there, ask them for a job. About a month goes by, and then they end up calling me. And I start working at Duck Commander for $8 an hour, folding clothes. You know, there's a lot more to that, but man, I end up getting the job there. They take a liking to me based on, you know, just my work ethic. And, you know, it was obvious I wasn't from there. Yeah. Right? Like, I showed up with a bald fade, tattoos, and Dickies on. You know what I'm saying? And so they'd ask me where I was from, and I'd just tell them, like, what I'd been through. And they're like, man, you're here for a reason. And I'm like, like, man, I'm just like, just don't come to me with no Jesus stuff. Like, I'm just trying to feed my kids. I don't want to sell drugs to do it. Like, it's just
So So you're being honest with them.
Yeah. And so they just, man, they said something to me that changed my life.
What'd they say?
I love you. They said, I love you. You know, nobody ever opened up a Bible. Nobody ever pointed to any verses. Nobody ever told me about my sin. These guys changed my life by saying the words, I love you.
It's so amazing. Simplicity of that.
And it was like, you know, there was no theological discussion. There was no, you know, archaeological or historical facts given to me to prove that God is who God is. Yeah. It was just like, man, we love you. And I had never really heard another man, you know, say that and then not come with like stipulations. You know, in the streets it's like, yeah, bro, I love you, but there's stipulations attached to that. You know? And so that was the first thing that really started provoking me to something different. I was like, man, what the heck are they talking about, man? Like, you love me. And next thing you know, like, they're giving me more and more responsibility. I started doing different stuff with them. Then they invite me to church. I start going to the church. And
so how was it when you went to church?
Oh, dude, I went. Let me tell you this. So originally I go to the church because I'm telling myself, okay, I'll go to church. They'll see me going to church. Maybe they'll give me a raise.
Yeah, gotcha.
Right? You know what I'm saying? I'm
and
like,
maybe there's some girls there.
Right, yeah. No, I was like, yeah. Maybe they'll give me a raise, this and that. So I go the first time, and I'm sitting there, and I'm like looking around, and I'm like, dude, this is all fake. Pastor's probably driving a Mercedes. Like we're just, they're just out here living their best life. Well, then I get back to work that Monday, and I'm expecting everybody to be like, hey, we saw you at church, and da-da-da-da. That way I was like, all right, cool. You see me? Let me get my raise type deal. And then I get back there, and nobody mentions it. Nobody's like, hey, we see you. I was just like, crap, I got to go again. And so I go the next time, and then I go the next time. And the more I went, the more I listened. And the more I listened, everything that didn't make sense made sense if I put God in the equation.
There's that verse that says, faith comes from hearing and hearing the word of God. And you were just there listening.
Yeah.
And God just started speaking to you slowly. That's what I always tell people. I go, you need to go to church. Just like go to church and just listen.
Right.
Just keep showing up. Because I know over time, God will connect. But if they're not going, then there's going to be no transformation. There's going to be no encounter with God because they're just not hearing it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And so, I used to base everything in my life on science and logic, so to speak. Scientifically, I should be dead. And logically, I should be in prison the rest of my life. And I wasn't in either one of those spots. And it used to drive me insane. Like PTSD, couldn't sleep at night. I used to stay up every night just staring in the mirror, getting high and drunk, like listening to music, trying to figure out what I was going to do, just like in that space of madness. And the only thing that ever made what my friend doing, me not being dead, and the only thing that ever made any of that make any type of mathematical sense was if there's a God and he has a plan for my life. And so it wasn't like, okay, great, I believe in God. No, I just started to say like, okay, God, if this is real, show me. And it wasn't like show me in a way of like, I need you to give me a burning bush.
Yeah.
It was like, show me, and I'm going to do and study and learn what this Bible says. And if you're real, it'll be revealed to me.
Right.
And
that's what's up.
And so I did. And man, he's just started revealing himself to me in so many ways. Next thing you know, I'm getting baptized. Phil Robertson baptizes me. And, man, it's like 0 to 100 real quick.
Yeah.
It's like 1 minute I'm like folding clothes for $8 an hour, or I'm like serving drinks at the watering hole for Willie out by Duck Commander. And then the next thing you know, like they're putting me on the show. People are flying me places to tell my story and everything like that. And it was, it was too much too quick. Not that God didn't know what he was doing, but I think that he was building character inside of me through this, right? Adversity breeds advancement. So in order for us to have advancements, we have to face adversity, not just in life and the stuff that people typically go through, but in our faith walk through as our faith is being built and as we're growing. Like there's got to be some friction and adversity you face in order for that to grow. And so for me, it looked like I'm going all over the place. I'm speaking. I'm doing this stuff. But I'm living this like double life. In my young adolescent Christian mind, I'm thinking, but it's all good. Grace abounds. God knows my heart and everything else. So like 9 to 5, I'm out. I'm talking about Jesus. I'm doing all this stuff. But then I'm coming home and I'm going to smoke a blunt, which, okay, God's cool with because he created the weed. You know what I'm saying? Then like I'm going to sleep with women and stuff. And then I'll just, I'm going to go talk about Jesus and he knows my heart. It's all good. Right? And then I got hit with the realization that either you're for me or against me. There is no gray area in the Word of God. It's like, hey, this is the truth. The way I am the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody could come to the Father except through me, and you doing a lot of you.
And this is why exactly what you were saying. God, show me. And as you're reading the Bible, the Word is His words, right? You read it, and He will show you how to live. And these guidelines and stuff that he has, it's for a healthy and awesome life. It's not to hurt you, actually.
No.
So you're reading, you come to that verse when Jesus said himself, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Or what was the verse you quoted? If you're not for me, you're against me.
Right. And so, I end up getting arrested, right? I had just come back from hunting camp, doing some stuff with Buck Commander. I get back and I'm just like, I'm celebrating, really. I go out to a bar, I have some drinks.
Yep.
My back was hurting, so I grabbed a pain pill from a friend, and I'm like, man, this Jesus stuff is awesome. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, man, everything's all good all the time. And I get back and I'm driving. I'm trying to give somebody a ride home because they're drunk. And I get pulled over and I get a DWI charge and a possession charge. I was so drunk, I forgot I had a pain pill in my pocket. Oh. So I get a felony possession charge and a DWI. This is 3 days before my episode is airing on Duck Dynasty. Season 9, episode 1, Bryan Rucker doing the ice cabin thing.
Oh,
like
my gosh.
3 days, like that show airs on Wednesday. That Sunday, your boy is in jail for a DWI and a possession charge.
Wow.
And then I'm sitting in the holding tank and I'm like, how did this happen? I got Jesus. Like what? And then the Holy Spirit hits me like a ton of bricks. And it's that either you're for me or against me.
Yeah.
You can't ride the fence.
Nope.
You can't ride the fence. I have a purpose for you, and it doesn't involve you doing any of this crap that you're doing.
Yep.
And,
exactly.
And then my next thought was, well, it's all over anyways. Like, they got to fire me. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like, there's just... and to my surprise, my mentor, Grant Taylor, and along with Willie Robertson, everybody got together. They came and got me out of jail. They let me keep my job. They just told me to do 2 things. They told me to sell my vehicle because I ain't never had a license. and then they said to move into a Celebrate Recovery house. And that's how I got into Celebrate Recovery.
That's how you got in.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And you know what I love about it is the grace.
Yeah.
The grace of God. We can't kick people when they're down. We got to help them. And it's like, can you imagine if they would have been like, hey, you know what? It's all over. You're done. You blew it. Get out of here. Then what? But instead, they showed the grace of God, which Jesus has so much grace on all of our lives.
Yeah.
And even the people that are listening now, like, God is in the business of giving you chances. He sees your heart. Mm-hmm. If your heart is right, sometimes we do stupid stuff like Peter. I love Peter in the Bible because, I like him because he's like me. He does stuff that he doesn't think about, but his heart's right. It just doesn't always come out well.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? But his heart's literally right when he's trying to do things. But God's grace on Peter's life, which he called him Pebble. Peter was kind of a tough guy, like outgoing guy, filthy fisherman, like, get it done guy, a guy that takes risk, a man of faith. But God used this guy mightily, in a powerful way. And now here you are, a man like Peter, going after it, making some mistakes, but your team came alongside you, your mentors, and these guys that you look up to that saw that God had a plan in your life.
Yeah.
Ultimately, they saw you, and they go, God has a plan for you, and you're in the right place. And then they had that grace, and now you're in Celebrate Recovery.
Yep.
Obviously, that did a great. It's discipleship.
Yeah. So it's a 12-step Christ-centered program, right?
Yeah.
And so I started working the steps. There was some struggles there too. Like, I got kicked out of the first CR house I went to, everything. Like, man, this process is one that's going to come with failure, but it's a part of the process, And so, I get into CR, start working the program, everything that I lost. The one thing cool the accountability that the guys at Duck Commander gave me and Buck Commander was like, hey, you're not going to be able to keep doing the stuff that you're doing, like this over here, going on hunts, filming stuff. Like, no, you're going to go back to the warehouse and you're going to run these tours. So it was like, we love you and we're here for you, but you're going to go into a season of humility, right? There's stuff that you're doing that was really cool, that built your ego, that built up some pride inside of you. We're doing away with that, and so ended up working everything back. People started asking me to speak again, became the manager of a sober living home. Then I became an addiction counselor, became one of the most sought after addiction counselors in the state of Louisiana.
God's using you, man.
And so, here we are today. I'm the director of Celebrate Recovery at Whites Ferry Road Church. I work there. We own sober living. The sober living houses I lived in for 2 years, I now own along with my partner, Derek McQueen. and still doing counseling and everything. And I'm just living in not living, but abiding in what God has for my life. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm done making plans. I'm done coming up with the rules. I'm done trying to figure out what tomorrow looks like or harboring on yesterday. I'm just like, God, if you call me to it, I'll have the faith to take the step.
And you know what? That's amazing. And I would say this, is that seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added. And that is the main focus with anyone in ministry, because as you see and I see and people that are in ministry, it's like Satan, he's always looking for a way to creep in. Mm-hmm. And what he wants to do is he wants to take people out that are being used for his glory in a mightily, in a great way. And God has entrusted you with a lot. He's using you a lot. He's put you around the right people that have come alongside you. So now the most important thing, not only for you, but for me, for even the listeners, is that we need to seek his righteousness daily, stay in his will, deny ourselves, pick up our cross, and follow him. Because God doesn't want lukewarm people, because he says, if you're lukewarm, he'll spit you out of his mouth.
Right.
You're either for him or you're against him. Yeah. Thank you for being on the show.
Man,
appreciate you, man. Love you, man. And tune in next week, you guys, and we will have another show for you next Saturday night. Peace.
This has been The Ryan Ries Show. To connect and find out more about Ryan, click on ryan-ries.com. Check us out next Saturday at 9 p.m. for The Ryan Ries Show.